Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of HeroesCon. Hope everybody had a good day 1. I have the distinct honor and pleasure today to interview 2 of my favorite creators and now YouTube celebrities. They're famous now. Jim RUGG and ED PISKOR of Cartoonist Kayfabe. Round of applause.
Thanks for coming by, guys.
So I guess my first question is, I want to start a little bit before the YouTube channel and podcast. Are these? All right. You want us to pause for the video? No, okay. Awesome. There we go. So I guess my first question is, how did you guys meet, become acquainted? Can you tell us the story of that, the secret origin, if you will?
Yeah, I was trying to make comics back home. I knew one other guy, lived across town. We would meet once a week in kind of the middle of Pittsburgh at a comic shop, get our new comics, and then go and look at what we'd worked on. Comic shops are a great place for, aspiring cartoonists to all meet up that way. It's kind of the informal network, I guess, before the internet. And so Ed found out about us through the comic shop, I believe, and showed up one week and brought his bundle of the comics he had done and was working on, and it was fooled right in. He was doing the exact same stuff we were doing.
I found the Street Angel mini at the local comic shop, and it was early enough in the 2000s where you could basically easily buy every interesting-looking independent comic. They would usually get pretty much everything in, and you could buy everything. It's not like today where there's so much good stuff out there that you just can't keep up at all. Picked up the Street Angel mini, saw that it was from a person in Pittsburgh, and the thing that impressed me the most, enough to email Jim to get in touch, was that he hand-lettered it, and I respected it, because a lot of the independent comics right then, there's a lot of stuff downstairs too that you see they use this computer font. It's the same computer font, and there's no real consideration for that, and all of that fits into one box to me over here. But the fact that it was somebody actually putting pencil to paper to do their lettering and actually composing it properly, I look at that kind of thing. That matters. So it was real cool to find somebody else that was making comics kind of at that nuts and bolts level, controlling every facet of the piece. I went to the Kubert School when I was 18, and this is when I came back pretty much. I went out there looking for, my Steve Bissette and Rick Veitch and Tom Yates and John Totalbin. Didn't find it up there, man. I found it when I got back home.
Jim, that's high praise. So when you get this email from Ed, do you remember this email for starters?
No, I don't. I think about this a lot. There's so many things that are become a huge moment in my life, and I can't tell you exactly how did I learn about this, where did it first cross my path, because it doesn't register that way. 100 things cross your path, and it's I'm checking this out, I'm looking further into this, and it doesn't amount to anything, or it's a small thing, or whatever. And this email, I've heard Ed mention this, but that's I don't remember it standing out, because we would meet up like this over the course of a couple of years, where we would get together and we would go to shows together. We would, talk about the project we were making, and then pretty soon that project would emerge, mini comics or comics, and other people would show up. They would come and go. They weren't serious. They weren't serious, right, really. So people would show up, and you don't know that on week one. You figure it out a month in, 2 months in, 3 years in. It's oh, this dude's here to stay, and now he's got 2 more books under his belt at this point.
Jim's a nice guy, and he's he's all inviting, and I was fuck these guys, man. These people ain't into this. I had enough experience up at the Kubert School when I could size people up and be oh, they saw this ad in a comic book, and they're simply on the fanboy level. They're not really trying to pledge their life to this thing, it's their first time away from home from mommy and daddy, and they're kind of bouncing off the walls. They're not sitting down writing and drawing. So I was able to size that up really quickly. And there would be knuckleheads coming through, man. But the first time I met you was at the Pittsburgh Comic-Con. You guys had your table, man. Street Angel, maybe issue 2 or 3 was out. And after that, that's when we started kicking it at the Phantom of the Attic, and it became this amazing thing of, making friends who are kind of like good on their word in as much as the ideas that they had for what they wanted to do creatively, which is a very, very rare thing. We all have our friend who's like the pothead on the couch, really great idea, man. And that's pretty much all I had up to that point, man. But Jim would have these ideas and present them. And then, a couple months later, a comic would come out, man. The first time we actually met at the comic shop, and we're sitting there in our little powwow, it's like you had your set of ideas. They came to fruition probably with the Aphrodisiac book that would emerge, a couple years after that. Our friend Jason had a comic come out through Antarctic Press. I was the last one who, like, at that meeting, when I presented the ideas I wanted to work on, which was WYSIWYG, took until 2012 for that thing to come out because I was kind of like self-publishing it, doing it on my own. And then I was also getting really involved with Harvey Peagler for a couple of years, drawing comics for him. So like once WYSIWYG came out, like that was the culmination of like all of our little hopes and dreams at that first meeting. They all came to fruition, like, after WYSIWYG came out.
Well, you mentioned the friends getting together, and that was the first thing that struck me about Cartoonist Kayfabe. I felt like I was sitting there in this group just listening to my two smart friends talk about comics. The podcast has a very earnest, a very honest feel to it. Is that accurate? Does that reflect these meetings you guys would have in the past, or?
Well, you know what I think it comes out of is traveling down the road. Like, we've done a lot of shows, man. And, this show we've been doing for years, and it's about an 8-hour drive. And I often think, like, that's my comics grad school, because it was usually Ed and Tom, or, Ed and Jason, or somebody. Often we'd have a third person, but it's like the only thing we have in common are comics. So you're in a car with somebody for 8 to 10 hours talking comics. You come down here for the weekend, and it is like, mainlining comics for the weekend. And then you get in the car and you go home and you talk about comics for another 10 hours. And, every show is some variation of that, every show that we would attend together and carpool together. And that's where that rapport comes from. Like, we would do that, and it was always a highlight for me. Like, I'd get home and I'd be like charged up, and a lot of it was just the car ride. I mean, the show's great, lots of great people here, but the car ride would be like where we're really advancing these ideas, or we're really arguing. At that point we know each other well enough. It's like we can disagree, and we can, kind of really pick at those ideas and get at the heart of them. And I think that's what the show comes out of, because often, like, we had done podcasts together before Cartoonist Kayfabe really became like a formed thing. And that's what all of that was based on, was like, these car rides are some of the best comics experiences of my life. If we recorded them, imagine what that would be. And believe me, it wouldn't be good. You're not missing anything, because it would be a lot of yelling at each other.
The first batch of years of us coming down here, we would actually hit the hotel and kind of have no voices left. And we threatened some friends, like, who would be the third wheel in the car ride, that, like, listen, man, save yourself, man. Use the Alexander technique, man, to, like, project from your diaphragm in this car, because when we get down there, man, you will not have a voice. And our homeboy Jason, I mean, we did shoot an episode or two of the old podcast, Tell Me Something I Don't Know. You hear his voice, man, it's like the frog in the throat, man, doesn't even apply. It's like something beyond that.
Well, so you did tell me something I don't know. What is the genesis of Cartoonist Kayfabe? How did this come about?
It's two parts. One part is we had both kind of rediscovered Wizard in the last few years, and it had I hate to use the word profound with Wizard, but it had almost a physical sensation of, like, going through this stuff, because I would read that as a kid, and it was like to me it was the key to becoming a comics professional. It was where I would find some information, penciled pages, process talk. It was really like I was trying to learn how to do this, and Wizard was about all I had. So I looked at that stuff, every issue I'd read 20 times when I was a little kid, and then didn't look at it again for 20 years. And whenever we got back to it, it was like crazy neuron response of, like, man, all these memory neurons are kicking the dust off and refiring. And it was almost like a drug. It was really a strong reaction. So that was like one piece of it. And then we did a show last fall, another car ride, to Baltimore Con. And Ed presented this idea, and it was like, yeah, man, I went in on that.
Yeah, I saw a lot of YouTube videos where people were going through old Nintendo powers. There was like retro video game YouTube channels, and I'm a part of that world myself in a small way. I've never, like, whenever I'm sitting down drawing pages, I'm listening to lectures, I'm listening to master classes. I would listen to these retro game YouTube channels. There was nothing in the comics realm for me to like queue up and keep me company while I was doing my thing. It was all customer chatter type channels, like top 10 lists of like Rob Liefeld's worst drawings, and that's so below me that I couldn't get down with that, man. And there's nobody getting in deep with any kinds of comics. It's can Thanos beat Galactus and simple-minded bullshit. So these conversations that we have that recorded on the channel, they're just conversations that we would have anyway. We just look a little bit less comfortable because we're training cameras on our faces, and it's weird, but I think we're getting more comfortable at it.
Did you do any prep work on the front end as far as format, or was it push, record, and go?
That was pretty much it. I mean, I don't even know about you, man, but I don't know that I even really made notes for the first issue of Wizard that we did, which would have been the first video. I read it and maybe put a few small bullet points, but when you see these pages and you see these names, we grew up in that era. Like, one of the reasons we're covering that stuff and talking about it is because that's the era that solidified us growing up to become cartoonists. It starts off and you have this like reverence for Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane. You grow from there, and just like revisiting that stuff, we have a very earnest place that we came from, and we could talk about from our perspective. And like it's very easy to talk about the value that we got from those guys. There's been like so much confusion in certainly the independent comic scene whenever a name like a McFarlane or Liefeld comes up in relation to us, and we don't dismiss them. There's a very specific era of those comics that has a lot of value, and I think as the channel has grown, we've presented the idea that you can like a comic, but you don't have to like the entire thing in order to like the Ken Brusnick lettering in a comic. That's how we roll.
Well, one side effect that I've noticed working in a comic shop is you guys, I've noticed that the fans of the show seem a little bit more empowered to say, yeah, I like Rob Liefeld.
That was a big thing. When I did Street Angel initially, I remember I was just, it was kind of like whatever I like, I'm putting in this comic. And what I liked was like Dan Clow's 8-Ball and early Image and, a bunch of these things that hadn't mixed a lot before that. I think yesterday we talked a little bit to some people, or Latour, I think, might have said this to us. He didn't realize there was a war between independent comics and mainstream comics, in the 90s. But there was this thing of like, we hate this stuff, it's bad. Probably Gary Groth, the general, on one side of the argument.
My dear publisher.
Yes.
Shouts Gary.
Yeah, all love to Gary. But there was this thing of like, it was one or the other, and they were two different separate camps. But man, that wasn't my experience. Like, I was reading all this stuff. I was looking at a wide range of artists, and it was like, that's the kind of, I'm going to make the comic of stuff I like. And it just happens to be sort of both camps. And I think that is becoming the norm now. And also, I don't think there are just two camps anymore. Like, there are so many veins of comics at this point, it would be really hard to be like, I'm just manga or I'm just web comics. Like, even that doesn't make sense, at this point. Like, all of this stuff is divided now into so many like subgenres and sub-styles. You almost have to be open, I think, because I don't know what you would buy that would be just one thing anymore.
Right.
That's part of why I did the X-Men Grand Design project too. Was because I'm not on the low rung. I'm not part of the long tail of the Fantagraphics authors. Like, I've made some books that sell.
Yeah.
And there has never been a Dan Clowes Marvel book or a Jaime Hernandez Marvel book or a Charles Burns. So I'm like, let me, I'm doing good over here at Fantagraphics. Let me just flip the script and see what it looks like when a very good selling author at Fantagraphics like makes a Marvel thing. Let's see what that looks like. It's never been done. Let's play around here, man.
It turns out it looks awesome.
Well, I mean, that was a given. It's me. You know? But a part of the statement was, I like it all. You know, I'm down with Rob Crumb. I'm down with Rob Liefeld.
So we know your comic experience, but we have to talk about it. It's in the name, you know, Cartoonist Kayfabe. So we know your comic influences. How did you decide that you would wrap the wrestling influence in with the comic book show, which is brilliant, by the way?
Common ground, you know, like common ground. Like comics is obviously number one, but like the close second common ground that we would have would be like the wrestling thing. Mm-hmm. Jim watches more new shit than I do, though, man. Like, I could talk to him about old territory days and stuff like that, but that's all I know. My pop culture knowledge, by the time I start making comics, I'm not really watching TV in any real way, you know what I mean? Like, sure. So I don't know who any actors are anymore or anything.
Yeah, I think the wrestling for me, I had fallen out of watching wrestling, I don't know, 2000, something like that. And what got me back in were all the podcasts of like wrestlers telling road stories, you know, telling stories behind matches, talking about kind of the storytelling of wrestling was really the hook for me in the last 4 or 5 years that got me interested in, you know, in the podcast and kind of in wrestling again as storytelling. And parallels to comics storytelling are abundant. It's pretty, you know, it was just a teaching tool for me in a lot of ways because I wanted to do a fight comic where I could still do the storytelling and the fighting. And so it was like, oh, take a look at wrestling because they're, you know, telling stories in the way matches unfold, you know, whatever that narrative is, they're creating drama within the fight. And I thought I could mine something out of there and put into fight scenes and make better fight scenes, better comic fight scenes. And that was the beginning of the wrestling, you know, like my re-interest in wrestling. And there's so much of that material out there, the behind the scenes stuff, the breaking kayfabe stuff at this point. And like Ed said, you know, like that's a pretty easy thing to talk about. If we do run out of comics topics on the road, you know, we might talk about the latest podcast, interesting story that's out there. And the other ingredient is probably Stan Lee's alliteration that we grew up on with old comics. Yeah. You know, we were throwing out titles, and that one seemed to fit. And it's kind of a happy accident because I think the wrestling stuff really does fit well. You know, we've started doing what we call shoot interviews, which are clearly influenced by wrestling shoot interviews, where it's just like basically get a cartoonist, put a camera on them, and kind of let them go. You know, let's hear their stories and their experience. And it's something I'm super excited about, and we're just getting into now. But it's another nice parallel to wrestling and wrestling storytelling. It's
a real fluid thing, the way the channel has evolved and incorporating these shoot interviews and the show and tell episodes. You know, it starts as the wizard thing, but then it grows from there, and we're able to pull from you know, the rest of kind of YouTube culture and see what's out there, and like how can we manipulate this stuff and get it to work for comics.
Right. Jim, you clearly white meat baby face.
White meat baby face.
Are you tweener or are you full on heel?
I would say chicken shit heel manager.
Jim Cornette.
I'll get on the mic, man, and I'll talk that smack, man. But if you come at me with some if your arms are too big, man, I'll let my homeboys handle it. like I'll run away and you'll chase me to Pittsburgh. And I'll get my friends in Pittsburgh to fuck you up.
Real quick, take a break. Does anybody have any questions so far for the distinguished? Yes, in the back.
I'm going to repeat the question just for...
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
The question is, what modern wrestling promotions do I follow? I don't follow anything too closely. Like, I listen to a lot more wrestling interviews than I do watch wrestling. AEW is clearly a fun story at the moment. Part of it is, you know, YouTube origins is really exciting, and that was something that I was thinking of as we started to put this together. That was something that was informing me. John Moxley, you know, Dean Ambrose leaving, I think is the big story at the moment, and I'm interested in that. I think it's amazing. So much of what I loved about wrestling has been stripped out of it through the WWE system, so it's interesting to see guys that are building those characters, because if you ask me who my favorite wrestlers are, it's all these old guys who built their own character. You know, that's the part that's like comics to me, is guys being different from each other because they have their own style, their own voice. And I want, you know, that's the part I like. So when that's gone, like, I'm not interested in WWE. I don't want to hear writers just having these guys all sound the same and basically say nothing. So it's been interesting to see some of that come up, but I don't watch a ton of the wrestling. You know, Chris Jericho, I think the last 2 years has been a revelation. doing things that nobody really has ever done before, and probably bigger now than he's ever been, which is remarkable for a 49-year-old wrestler to be at the top of his game.
My parents, you may or may not know this, man. I think I said it once or twice on the channel, but my parents raised a couple of Carney boys because I'm the comic book maker, but my kid brother was a like a mud show wrestler.
Oh, wow.
and referee who he traveled the country, he traveled the world a little bit. So he's involved in the pro wrestling game. And the joke we always have is whenever I get together is like, who'd you see naked this time, man? Because that's the story he always tells, man. Is like the Iron Sheik chasing him butt naked or something like that, man. It's weird.
The one other piece of wrestling thing that I enjoy right now is the Dark Side of the Ring stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. Like I was watching there was an episode about the Von Erichs.
Yeah, it's a Vice documentary series. You can find it on YouTube pretty easy.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot of good press. It's documentary half-hour episodes on different stories. And so they tell the Von Erich story and they show a Von Erich comic book, which I have. I like a lot of these indie weird comics, and that one crossed my radar. And it crossed my radar because of a site or because of a Instagram guy, Power Comics, and he highlights a lot of like the 80s self-published black and white stuff. One of my sources for this information. And I realized it's the same guy. Like there's a couple main guys behind Dark Side of the Ring, and one of them is the guy behind Power Comics.
Yeah,
so it's
he's
kind of
the
this
producer.
Small world of obviously wrestling and comics.
So many parallels, like you said, the character, the high personalities, the alter egos between a kayfabe wrestler and his regular day-to-day. I did that hip-hop family tree comic. Hip-hop fits into this. It's this trash pop culture thing that isn't trash to any of us, but like maybe our mom and dad would have wished we read a little bit more, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, Shakespeare bullshit,
Other questions? Yes, the distinguished gentleman in the Hawaiian shirt.
We'll divvy up the division of labor like on a week-to-week basis. So, for instance, the Wizard episodes, we started it off, and it was understood that I would edit this one. Finally, figured out how to get really good video shooting straight down, which is actually a challenge that took us a number of weeks to figure out, man, maybe 2 months. But in defense of ourselves, we shot about 5 weeks of video that nobody saw, so it took us a little while to figure that stuff out. We'll put in a whole day pretty much, once you hit a certain level of subscriber on YouTube, this it unlocks this YouTube Academy, so you could see all these kind of almost like classes on what to do and how to strategize the channel. And one of the important things that I discovered was it's always good to shoot at least 3 things in a day, make manageable videos that can be shot all in a day. And we just try to make really, really good use of our time. I'll edit 1 week, Jim will edit the next, and that will basically give us 2 weeks to turn an episode around. So it's very manageable because we are cartoonists first. You have anything to add?
Yeah. We'll plan what are we going to shoot next week or 2 weeks, so that we can read and basically prep, and sometimes that's just reading a comic or looking over something that we plan to delve into, and sometimes it's taking notes and really showing up and try to be prepared. So you're always working on several of these episodes at a time, and it's almost like I hate to say homework, but there'll be books that it's like, okay, you gotta read these this week, which works out kind of well. It's a chance to read these comics in a way that's maybe a little closer reading than I would do if I were just reading them as I nod off at night. So that's a big part. We have some shared documents where we keep lists of potential things we might look into, or something will come up where it's like we have to talk about this. Maybe a book arrives in the mail and it's really something that captures our imagination, or it's something we're working on and it's like we'll put the camera on that drawing you're making or whatever, and then and we do these on our own as well, depending on what strikes our fancy.
There's a question over here. Yes, red shirt.
I think we're beyond your era, right?
Yeah, we hit mine. Mine was issue 10 was my first one, and man, I was excited. And that issue, I loved getting into it again. It felt like a double issue. There was so much stuff in there. So that's one of the big highlights for me.
There's a lot of good stuff when I started getting into it, which would have been issue 37. There's a Todd Klein lettering article that was really cool. One of the
bedrocks of our friendship, probably the seed being planted, the lettering column.
Yeah. It's generally process stuff that's most interesting to me. So I remember there was an inking article that I forget who drew the pencil version, but they got 5 or 6 different inkers to do their interpretations, and you get to see each of their processes and hear their explanation. I think, like, Jim doesn't know this stuff. Like, I don't know that you've ever seen any of this. So, like, we present that initially. There'll be, I think you'll have a lot to say, and I certainly will, because it was very close to me. But then there's even stuff that, I have no interest in sculpture or sculpting per se through by myself. But there was like a Randy Bowen article where it's a process piece, and he's making a Boba Fett sculpture out of Super Sculpey and manipulating his own armatures that he is bending a coat hanger to create the skeleton of the thing. And that kind of stuff is really fun. But one of the things that we were charting over a bunch of the Wizard episodes is like some of the price guide stuff. Like, what is the value of Miracle Man 15, which was just basically cover price in those early days. And then there will be a moment where they had this article called Good and Cheap. And they highlighted that issue. And like, I don't want to say anything to get myself sued, but you just know that somebody somewhere bought a gang of that stuff because it's right after Eclipse liquidates.
Yes.
They do the Good and Cheap thing, and then now you can't get Miracle Man 15 for anything less than $100. So there are these narratives that play out in Scandal that with the benefits of 25 years of hindsight and being able to read about like what some of these bad actors were up to in later days, and we could correlate it with perhaps articles they wrote in an earlier Wizard. It's a pretty fascinating story, man. There's no SEC regulation when it comes to comic book pricing, man. The government ain't watching, and some guys know it.
Yeah.
And they will take clear advantage of it, man.
One issue I'm looking forward to, because next up will be like year 3 of Wizard, will be the next chunk of Wizards that we start in on. Issue 31 is one I'm fond of, and that's the announcement of Legend. So like at the time, that was one I was really into, so that was an issue I read over and over as a kid, and one of the first ones I got into whenever I started looking at Wizard again. So I'm looking forward to that one. It's fun to see some of these articles that come up, because I'm sure, and I haven't looked at it again yet for this upcoming recordings, but I'm sure like Hellboy, what Hellboy becomes is not what we're going to see in that early mention. It'll be probably like a little sidebar. Like people joke with me all the time, because every time we see like a Savage Dragon ad, I'm like, why aren't they profiling the dragon? That was like my favorite Image book back then. And I'm just waiting for these moments. So that's been pretty fun, because like my memory's wrong. Like the stuff that goes on to be big and successful, you'll see it mentioned in like a little tiny caption and be like, wait a minute, I thought this is a huge book and a movie franchise, and it's not, it's barely mentioned, it's a footnote when it first comes through. We've seen that with some of the Marvel deals, like knowing where this is headed, they'll mention these things that become pivotal pieces of comics history, and it's barely mentioned, but like as we're reading it, it's like, man, this is this was the groundwork. But by Fleet or Flair or whatever that card company was for $300 million.
Yeah,
bad idea.
And then
idea.
Then go bankrupt 2 years later, man. Another thing that's going to be really great to revisit are the drawing courses. I think they're called Crash Course eventually. It's beyond Brutes and Babes. There's a Bart Sears joint at first that was like, that was 101. But then when you get the Greg Capullo drawing courses, when he was at the height of his game on Spawn, those are really cool. Then Adam Warren will do a bunch, and those are just gorgeous.
I'm looking forward to reading those.
Yeah, really, really, really fun.
It'll be funny whenever I bow out. Like I quit reading Wizards originally probably in the early 30 issues. Mm-hmm. So like a lot of these Wizards, we're going to get out of the stuff that I remember fondly as a child, and I'll be reading it for the first time and probably very confused. So that I kind of look forward to seeing how those episodes play out.
I mean, that's where I was with the stuff that we've already done.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And, it was very beneficial to me to just kind of like connect some dots that I sort of knew how things shook out, and it will be fun to see when you check these things out for the first time. In a lot of ways, I'm like pledging to Jim that it won't be a waste of time. Like, dude, I'm telling you, man, just wait till we get to that Todd Klein lettering thing, man. It's going to blow your mind.
Second row, you had a question.
Corey, what's up?
Tom Scioli is like personally a breakout star on the channel. I'm one of them.
The Fonzie.
He's definitely the cool dude in the room.
He's my dad's favorite character. That's what he told me.
How much more of Tom are we gonna see? And was it hard to convince him to get on the camera?
He's our homeboy, like whenever he can make the time, like it's kind of tough to organize, 3 schedules, but whenever the stars align and all 3 of us are available, he's always invited. Yeah, no, he's cool. It's just, he's got a lot of responsibility going on. For the past 3-4 weeks, we've been posting a lot of video, and that's because if you keep up with the Kayfabe weeklies, we had the big stack on the table because Jim and I just finished a couple of big projects. I was drawing X-Men Grand Design for more than 1,200 days in a row, 7 days a week, and it was great to kind of like step back from that. So we were able to switch gears and produce a lot of video while we're writing our next projects. Almost done writing, so it's going to get back to comic book making time, and that's going to slow down a lot back to the original plan pretty much, man. Do 2 videos a week or something. That seems to be a good pace. It definitely will not go. I think the rule of thumb for us, because there are some like dismal issues. And the oasis is Palmer's Picks. When there's no more Palmer's Picks, screw that magazine. It was the only thing that was legitimately good in there. And we're not like spending our time like talking smack. Our show it's a historical analysis of like what's happening in that period, and we're using that as kind of like the backbone to talk about this stuff. But after that, it's like, consider me fully jacked out of like mainstream comics at that point. I might have still picked up an issue here or there just from sheer inertia, but the late 90s in comics, I think I finished getting monthly comics at that point. I think Preacher is my last monthly comic that I ever read, and that finished up in the year 2000.
And there's lots of other stuff, 1986 is like my Magic Comics year, so there's no shortage of, we can be looking at Amazing Heroes. There's a lot of history that I would like to take a deeper look at. And, you finish one thing or you take a break from one, and it allows you like when we broke, I think after year 1 and looked at the Comics Journal double episode, that was really fun. It was like the change of pace for us. It was a different perspective on this time period. So, comics history I find it fascinating. So there's almost any era, I'm happy to like, let's spend some time looking closer at this incident or this publisher or this time period. And, there's no shortage of those things. Yeah,
my dear publisher, Gary Groth at Fantagraphics, they gave us the keys to the kingdom and gave us the password so that we can go into their FTP server and take a look at any issue of Comics Journal we like. And when we did that Comics Journal issue, it was germane to the era that we were talking about with the Wizard stuff. But if you just peel open any of those old TCJs, man, it'll be hard not to make 5-hour episodes all the time.
That was a question in the back, yes.
I just want to thank you guys so much for this show. It's incredible. I love kind of the pedagogy behind it. Like, anybody can do this, and you got to work hard. And Ed, I took a little portion of it to show some of my kids in my school that I teach, the part where you said, hey, I spent all weekend doing a self-portrait. Some guy did 10 minutes and got an A, but I was going to prove a point to myself that I could do this. And I think that hit me hard, and it was like, wow, I love that. So again, I just love the work you guys do. A lot of fans. And the last question is, can you make a t-shirt that says Sam and Hager?
That's a Bobby Heenan quote, man. So I would be I want to respect the guy, man. I don't want his like blue Jedi ghost to come chase me for stealing his rap.
That leads me to a question: the fandom that has formed around Cartoonist.
Saw a lot of
Kayfabe.
kayfabe shirts in the crowd, man. The past weekend, like the past couple of days.
How do you guys process that? Did you expect it to take off to the level that it has?
Oh, it's not done. It hasn't even hit the level I want it to be at yet.
There've been some interesting surprises. You know, whenever we started working on it, I was just thinking of like, how do we shoot this video, or how do I edit this video? You know, like it was very technically focused, or it was reading, you know, prepping for an episode, and there wasn't that much thought given, like how will this look if it takes off, or when it takes off, or at a show or something. So I guess it makes sense based on, you know, YouTube shows that I follow or podcasts that I listen to. But it wasn't something I had spent any time thinking about, because it's one of those things that's kind of out of my hands. You know, like I can put all my effort into making the show. I can't really put all my effort into making sure people wear t-shirts to the show or something like that. So I tend to focus on the stuff I have control over and just hadn't given it much of a thought. And this is the first show that I've done since we started the show. So it's been great. It's been really cool, and has caught me by surprise a little bit. You know, people coming up and thanking us for the show or whatever. And it's this awesome, great feeling, because quite frankly, there's a lot of stuff I listen to or watch, the same deal, man. I'm sitting in a room by myself and, you know, I'm listening to whatever, and it's entertaining me. I feel like I know these guys, and now, you know, to turn that around, it's kind of cool, you know, like, all right, we a little bit of payback for, you know, the guys who have done this for me.
Have you seen the fandom like pay off in your work? Has there been any kind of like upsurge in like book sales?
I got a sort of the best WYSIWYG royalty check recently than I had in recent past, probably over the past couple of years. So that's clear, demonstrable evidence that people are discovering us, discovering our body of work, our bibliographies, and have some curiosity enough to check out the comics. So it is helping. And, you know, if I was to lay out my real plans and strategies of like why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, the kind of comics that I make exist in kind of like a graphic novel market. And these books take a long, long time to make, at least a year. And the way our culture is today, out of sight, out of mind, there's so much stuff out there, it could be easily forgotten. So we could do these videos each week, keep up with our crowd, give a little bit of a peek into the process of the next projects that are developing, just build a stronger audience, you know, with the books. Like the books are number one. We're cartoonists, you know, but this extra piece easily fits in with the greater whole. You know, it's like the Bullet Club YouTube stuff, you know.
Yeah, and anecdotally, like at this show, I've had several people come up that say they love the show but haven't read any Street Angel Where to Start. You know, so definitely it's increased interest, you know, in my work, and I'm sure at least exposed it to a few potential new fans.
The channel was almost killed this weekend too, by the way, man, because it's like we each had our crowds. But when I saw this like super giant long line, I'm like, if they're all here for fucking Jim, I'm quitting because it's clearly not helping me out. But that line was for Scotty Young, so it was all good.
Next question.
We can't agree on the number of shirts that we've seen so far, man. It's somewhere between 80 and 90 over the past couple of days. But the bet was just, will we see 10?
Yeah, it was great walking from our hotel to the convention this morning. We passed somebody in a Cartoonist Kayfabe shirt biking down the sidewalk, and it's like, man, that's a good sign. That's a way to start.
Other questions?
We are thorough.
So a question. So you've seen the Cartoonist Kayfabe T-shirts. Audience is growing. You mentioned that you're cartoonist first. Has it started interfering with that?
No. Like, if you, as a cartoonist, and we're cartoonists who make the work ourselves, requires such an amount of discipline and self-regulation and self-control I think that's, I'm not going to speak for you, but to me it's like habitually a thing where it's like, you know, the comics are first. I won't go to important functions for my comics. I'll sacrifice a lot of things for the comics. If you could get an extra day in, then that's YouTube day. And if we, adjust accordingly, then X day is YouTube day, and that's it. That's how it's been for me.
Yeah, that's about it. Trying to figure out a schedule, some kind of regular whatever. The schedule thing is so important. It's something I think a lot of people imagine, oh, I'm an artist, I can sleep in, or I can do this, or take a day off, or whatever. Man, I need that schedule. And so, like, if we typically record the same day each week, and it's pretty good. You can set your clock to it. It's like, now I have a deadline. This is what I have to get done this week. And I know that, come Tuesday or come Thursday, whatever day we're recording, that's a new week then. I used to work the 7-day-a-week method, and the problem with that is you never have to have that check-in point. It's always, you just wake up and you work, and you go to bed and you wake up and work. I benefit from having that weekly chunks where it's like, plan the week, man. This is what you've got to get done this week, and come that last day, maybe you have to work a little extra that day or whatever. So it all works out. You schedule, and I think this is very valuable. Being able to schedule around a day a week, like, I can do that.
Have you got any feedback from other creators?
Lots.
What have they said?
They all love it. It's pretty unanimous. As we continue doing these shoot interviews and stuff, I think we're going to be able to get like really, really good people, because there are people I never even thought about who are popping up, and it makes me a little self-conscious because then I have to watch my tongue a little bit, man. But
it's funny to hear, like, people come up and talk about Wizard and how, like, it brings them back or whatever. And I don't want to name names, but, like, sometimes I'm surprised by, like, you have any interest in Wizard at all? There've been some pretty interesting cartoonists that have come out and said that. And then the flip side is many of them come up or post pictures online of, like, I'm working and watching, or working and listening to. And it's that thing I said about, like, we all sit in this room and listen to podcasts. And a lot of cartoonists seem to be happy to listen to our show and watch our show while they're working.
Any former Wizard staffers, employees reached out yet?
I'll let you handle this one, Jim.
We haven't heard from him yet. Yeah, it's been up and down. We sometimes you have to regulate who's commenting and what those comments are. So we've gotten some feedback from former Wizard staff.
It sounds positive.
Sure. I think the Comics Journal feedback, the Comics Journal staff has been a little more positive in their feedback than the Wizard staff. Although, Palmer's Picks, like we've talked to Tom Palmer Jr. a lot. He's started reposting his original columns and notes on those columns. And, I'm an unabashed fan of that stuff, man. That stuff really broadened my horizons as a reader the first time around. So it's great to get notes from him, or to post links or share links or anything, and he seems happy about it, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny. Like his name didn't come to mind at all when I heard the words Wizard staff.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, he was clearly kind of doing his own thing, and then they published his article, because it is so divorced from every other piece of content in those magazines, man. But that is the article that I pretty much was buying that magazine month in, month out to see what is the next independent comic that I should check out. And stores operated accordingly. When the THB episode of Palmer's Picks came out, and whatever Wizard that was, I didn't see THB. And then the stores bought some THB and stocked the shelves at the local shop after the Palmer's Picks came out. So it had a lot of value.
Any chance we'll ever see him on the show?
I think so. He's going to be in Baltimore. So, like, if we get a hold of him, absolutely. He seems pretty cool. Tom Palmer Sr. had to cancel this weekend to be here, but we were making those moves, man. Like, man, we need to get the old man Palmer in front of the camera and ask those questions, because name a better inker,
Yes, front row.
I don't think we've talked about it at all, but it's come up a couple of times this weekend. People have had this kind of question. They've talked about, watching particular wrestling storylines or promos or something and looking at those the way we do comics. I don't know. That's a new idea for me. So I haven't given it any thought, but yeah.
When applicable, CM Punk, famous comic fan. There's a guy at the WWE called Corey Graves. Like, my brother grew up with him. He's a Pittsburgh kid, so whenever he's in town, he and I would rap about Preacher all the time. So if we could do it on cam and, on the YouTube channel, like, why not? But definitely whenever applicable, and if we can make that happen, sure. But I wouldn't expend much energy like pursuing those guys. I would definitely pursue a cartoonist far more than any wrestling person. That's just me personally.
And there may be a range of guests that we end up talking to. It wouldn't just be cartoonists either. Like, it could be retailers, it could be publishers. It could be writers that exist outside of cartoons. We do a lot of reading and listening to, books on audiobooks and things. So, there's a lot of interesting people that I think relate to what we're doing and talking about, that if you cross paths, like, yeah, man, sit down and let's talk about where that overlap is. They're
really important for the ecosystem of comics too, the retailers, like a really good retailer like Shelton, who puts this festival together downstairs. There's a guy, Jason Hamlin. He's the retailer to the Kayfabe stars, man. Go check his booth. So much good stuff down there. If you saw our episodes on like outlaw comics, bootleg comics, any of those, like, you can get those at his booth. Those people are important to the game. A really good editor,
that'd be cool.
Works wonders with the final product of a lot of comics that you dig. And they're just back channel people, art dealers who help create a secondary income for cartoonists that make it possible to do their work. Maybe their comic sales are whatever, unsustainable when it comes to paying the bills, but these art dealers are able to get their work in front of the eyes of very wealthy patrons, and they can sell the art and be able to pay the bills so they can make like their next masterpiece comic that nobody's quite paying enough attention to. So really interesting world behind the scenes of the comic industry. I call it culture. And we're going to bring some of that stuff to the surface over time.
Yes, sir.
So the question is, do we think about softening our criticism or doubling down on the criticism we provide because it's a small world and people may be sensitive? I'm always surprised by how thin-skinned everybody is, ourselves included. It's funny, the stuff that will offend me. And I feel like we approach, the criticism stuff from an honest point of view, like try to be honest with what we're getting out of this or what we think of this. There's not a lot of, I try to avoid speculation on like, why did they make this choice or whatever, because, I just don't know that part. Like, I'm trying to judge what's on the page. And if it's critical, it's critical. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there is a perfect comic. So like, every comic has some goods and bad, and, that's life. Like Ed's talking about, you might appreciate a comic for the Ken Brusniak lettering or something, and I'm on board for that, because if I was holding out for the perfect comic, I probably wouldn't be a comic fan. So I have no problem with, being critical. People that I'm friends with have been critical of my work, and it's all right. It's fine. I don't know if I've had any like altercations. If somebody comes up to me and is really upset with a review, who knows, maybe that'll change my future. But so far, I don't regret anything that we've said or put out there yet.
I think one of the differences between our channel and most other comics channels is that, at least at this point, and probably for the foreseeable future, we're highlighting stuff that we give a shit about, stuff that we like, kind of trying to put some good energy out there. When you do the wizard thing and you have to turn to a page and see some bullshit, I don't give a shit. Like, I don't care, man. My bills are paid for a while. And if people hold a grudge for years and years, they can't kiss my ass. So I could care. I could care less, man. So that's going to be dicey with the wizard stuff, because I will get the crap that I think is total horseshit. And I've only escaped poverty 5 years ago. I'm not afraid to go back. If it all implodes, I'll just get a job and whatever. I could care less. But the commentaries that we provide, we don't have a boss telling us what to do. So we choose the comics. And if you see all three of us, it means we all agreed to check this thing out. And, generally speaking, it's because we like the thing. We'll never present something and just dog it, especially in like the solitary episodes where we're talking about like a specific comic. What's the value in that? Punching downward in some kind of way. Like,
Yeah, that always surprises me with the internet, being known for its negativity or whatever. Man, I feel like there's so many comics. If no more comics were published, I still wouldn't be able to read and get to all the stuff that has caught my eye that I'm interested in. It kind of surprises me. So like life is short, and my list of stuff I want to read keeps getting longer. I'm not going to exhaust that list ever. As Ed said, I'm not interested in picking the book that I'm not interested in and then spending a bunch of time with it. So usually there is going to be some positive spin on this stuff because it's stuff I like. It's stuff that's caught my eye. It's stuff I want to read.
Well, we're coming up towards the end. I do have one final question for both of you. Is there, speaking of things that you like and you're passionate about that's caught your eye, is there something right now that maybe you haven't mentioned on one of the shows that Kayfabers could give some attention to that has recently caught your eye?
I think it's been an amazing 365 days since last HeroesCon for this guy who's down there named Matt Lesniewski. Has a book called The Freak. We talked about it once or twice before on the channel very briefly, but now he has a tangible book that has come out of Ad House Books, and it's just incredible. There's another book downstairs by a guy named Nick. It's the Pink Lemonade.
Oh yeah,
comic. Nick
Cagnetti. Yeah, Pink.
Yeah.
Pink Lemonade.
You could find him against the back wall in Artist Alley. Incredible comics.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Like if you're into things like Madman and some of this stuff that's a little bit kind of off kilter but has a superhero bright poppy sensibility, that's a book to check out. It's real interesting, and I'm going to give it the ultimate plug in October because I did a cover for it. But it's a really interesting book, and I've been following his stuff for probably 6 months online, and I'm excited that there's a book out, because I know people engage in this stuff in different ways, and people who are comic book fans, I think it's one to look out for.
So, well, any final thoughts before we all say goodbye until the Sienkiewicz panel later today?
Just appreciations on my part. Just very, very thankful that you guys came. Hear us yammer about the channel. We appreciate your support with checking out the videos, subscribing to the videos. It's a ball. It's a pleasure to do. It's creating this circle of influence. Also very appreciative. Jim and I, we know what we know, but the comments section has proven very valuable. I call them the Kayfabe brain trust because we might present a question to one another and not know the answer, but we've built up enough of a subscriber base that somebody has the answer almost all the time, and that's really cool.
Yeah, same here. I love the response. That community has been amazing. So keep it up, and thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. Cartoonist Kayfabe.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you so much.